Today we're talking about snail photography. Why? Because while snails may seem easy to photograph, they have a couple aspects to them that increase the levels of complexity as you try and get your pictures. Also, I need any excuse I can get to use my macro lens. First, we're going to talk about the gear I use, and then we're going to talk about the techniques and challenges that are involved with snail photography, starting with the basics and then getting more complex as things go along. And then at the end, I'm going to show you a technique I used in the studio to get a really cool shot, but it's also possible to use in the wild. The camera I shot these pictures on was a Sony a7R III, the one I'm filming on right now. You've got a lot of megapixels for cropping and you get outstanding autofocus performance. It's a fantastic camera. The lens I used was none other than the Sony 90mm macro 2.8 lens. You've got your clickable autofocus manual focus ring, you've got your focus limiter just to speed up that autofocus, and then of course optical steady shot. You've got your focus hold button. It's an amazing lens. Now for my flash situation, I used two different speed lights. I used a variety of modifiers, this one being one of them. And then I use this wireless transmitter to get the flash off of the top of my camera. That is very important. So whether you're using a wireless transmitter or you're using a wired tether, that is so important, and I'll explain why later. So here's the challenge about snails, is they are very three-dimensional, because not only do you have the depth of the shell itself, but you have the depth of, I can feel his mouth. So weird, I feel him chewing. But so now, God, that's weird. You want to hold him?
No, I don't even really, no.
Okay.
I'm good.
So not only do you have the depth of the shell, but the eyes move independently. Now obviously snails don't move very fast, but in a macro world, they don't stop moving. So the eyes are moving around, the bottom are moving around. So you're gonna need a very deep depth of field just to make sure you capture all the variables that the snail has to offer. Now the top two tentacles hold the eyes, and usually the front one's looking at you. So you'll find that you're catching the back eye in focus and the front eye out of focus because it's turned and it's seeing what you're doing. So my first tip for you is to get low and create layers. It's no secret that eye level shots are the better shots the majority of the time. So if you want to get the better shot, you need to get low to where you have your subject, the background, and possibly even a foreground. And if you can't find a foreground authentically, it's easy to fake with macro. You just get some grasses or a stick with some leaves and you put it in front of it. It's going to be out of focus anyway, so you can use that and create some depth. Tip number two, of course, get your flash off of the top of your camera. I can't tell you how important it is that you're able to move that light around. If you've ever worked in a studio, you know how big of a difference it is to move the big softbox around and look at the different kind of lights and looks you can get. Well, the great thing about this is it's like a studio shrunk down. So moving the flash around in your hand can drastically change the look of your photos. If all your light's coming from one way, you're gonna be very limited in the type of shots you can get. If you get your flash off the camera and you don't know where to start, a good rule of thumb is to use your 45s. 45 degrees up, 45 degrees to a side. Now you don't wanna negate the effects of top-down lighting. So I have it set to manual focus with focus peaking. So as he moves, I just slightly move the camera, know where my focus is set, and then just focus on adjusting my light to get a bunch of different options. The next thing I do is I use a rim flash to separate the snail from the background. Now this isn't always possible with macro photography, so if you're hiking or it's raining, something like that, but if you have the means, put the rim flash in the background because snails are brown and dirt and bark and dead grass are also brown. So with the rim flash, you're more easily able to distinguish the snail from the background. Now I usually keep the power real low on that rim flash just because I like to keep a natural look to it. The third tip's kind of a cliche, but I love using it. Add water. So if it's not raining, use a spray bottle. You're gonna get a nice misty look to your image, and then a lot of things are gonna get shiny reflective surfaces, and you can get some really cool, interesting shots. With water, you just get so much room to play with things. I'm shooting pretty fast just to watch this guy go. So if the snails are close by and you have a water bottle, go ahead and get some sprays. Just be careful not to use too much water. Snails can drown, so you want to be safe with it. My fourth tip is knowing when to switch to manual focus. Now, I love Sony's autofocus speeds on this lens, and it's even faster with the focus limiter. And usually when I'm using it, I'll use small or medium point focusing, and I'll compose and I'll just tap the screen. Super easy. But in some instances, I'll switch to manual focus and I'll use focus peaking. That way, if the snail's moving, and if I'm not on a tripod, if I'm moving, I can just use that focus peaking, fire burst, and just make sure I get the shot that way. My fifth tip is something I got from watching a Nat Geo live event. 20 to 40% of the time, nail the shot. Make sure everything's sharp, it's in focus, give yourself something to edit. The other 60 to 80% of the time, get creative with it. Try something new, try different angles, different lighting. Try and slow your shutter speed down to reduce the noise. Try and slow your shutter speed down to get a movement shot. Now in the studio, I use this trick where I would move the leaf backwards after firing on a 1 second shutter, and I would get this look like the snail was moving fast. So one of the artsy things that you can do is working with flash, you can get a little bit of motion blur by setting your camera to a low shutter speed. So what I did, I'm at 1 second f14. I'm moving the leaf back after I take the image. The reason I'm not taking the image and letting him move is I don't want the image of a fast backwards moving snail. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna set him right there. And then after I take the picture, I'm gonna just move the leaf backwards. So he'll be sharp, but you get this illusion of a very fast moving snail. Click and then pull. It gives a really cool look. You get a lot of variation with it. So that time I really hesitated. So the blur isn't as strong, but it just gives the illusion of a fast moving snail. Something that's a lot of fun. Something artsy, something creative, but it's something different. But doing all these new things, it's gonna flex your creative muscles and give you new ideas and make you a better photographer.